Chapter 27, An Antichrist Rebellion. The circle of unearthly creatures opened as suddenly as it had closed. Viktor and Carla watched in stunned bewilderment as their three colleagues walked slowly back toward them. The pyramid disappeared instantly, and the nine vanished with it. When Leighton, Sasso, and Morris had resumed their original places facing the strange craft just in front of Viktor and Carla, they put their palms together and bowed 9 times again. The vibrating ohm faded, and in its place a strange, whirring sound arose and grew in volume. To their consternation, Viktor and Carla realized that the UFO had swung around to point in their direction. It was gathering speed and heading directly toward them. Leighton sensed their terror and reached back a cautioning hand. Without taking his eyes from the strange craft, he yelled, "Don't move!" The whirring sound had become a high-pitched scream when, at greatly accelerating speed, the UFO passed within inches over their heads and out through the side of the warehouse. Carla clutched Viktor, and together they clung to each other as a brief wave of nausea passed over them and subsided. Carla had cringed in anticipation of the devastation as the spacecraft tore through the walls. To her complete astonishment, the warehouse was now empty and still intact. Her eyes met Viktor's, and for a moment they clung to one another in sheer relief. "You took it very well," said Leighton when their ears had stopped ringing. "Better than I did the first time I had this experience." He could not hide his own trepidation, however, even now. Morris seemed to be controlling herself with great effort. Only Sasso was completely cool. It seemed to Carla that he was almost indistinguishable from the archons. So closely had he become identified with them. Leighton led them back outside. The CIA agents were still pulling weeds in a bored and half-hearted manner. Had they seen this giant spacecraft come bursting out of the side of the building so often that it no longer affected them? Viktor took hold of Leighton's arm. "What does it look like from out here when that thing comes shooting out of the building?" Leighton put a finger to his lips and shook his head to remind Viktor that their experience was not to be shared with others. "They saw nothing out here," he said in a low voice. "So far the archons have chosen only to reveal themselves to us, and only inside that building. Out here they're invisible, but one day they will make themselves known to the entire world." "When you were in that pyramid of light," whispered Carla, unable to restrain her curiosity, "what did you talk about?" Again, Frank put a finger to his lips and shook his head. "We'll share that later," he said, and led the way to the car. Once inside their auto, and on their way back to the base, Frank gave vent to his suppressed excitement. "We've been given the date," he announced to Viktor and Carla. 6 weeks from next Friday. That doesn't give us much time. Carla's first article will be printed tomorrow, and the archons promise an enthusiastic reaction from both the media and the public. Still stunned from their experience, Carla and Viktor seemed scarcely able to comprehend what Frank had said. "Didn't you hear me?" he asked. "We've got the date for the World Congress." "That's fantastic," said Carla, "but I'm so disoriented I can hardly think. I've just seen what looked like a huge solid object sail right through the side of a building, as though the walls weren't there. And then you say it's invisible outside? What was that thing?" "Call it a UFO, if you like," responded Frank. "The nine say there's no way they can make us understand such events at our present level of development. It's some kind of transmogrification of psychic energy. That's all they can tell us." Viktor was beside himself. "Frank, what we've just seen makes Columbus' discovery of America, the Bolshevik Revolution, man walking on the moon, and everything else that's happened in history seemed like nothing in comparison. This is it. This is the ultimate." "Visions of the Virgin Mary are of the same order of event," put in Sasso casually. "All religions originally came from such apparitions." "Apparitions?" asked Carla in surprise. "What we saw wasn't really there?" "It was and it wasn't," responded Frank. "It's the old question of what's real, and you know there's no answer to that. I saw it with my own eyes, said Victor, still overcome with awe, or no one could have gotten me to believe it. Oh, I almost forgot to tell you, said Frank, addressing Carla and Victor again. They informed us that the gathering of leaders is to be called World Congress 666. I like that, said Del Sasso with a hearty laugh. In fact, I love it. 666? Asked Victor. Does it mean something? Now, there's one of the advantages of growing up in an atheistic society, laughed Carla. No Antichrist myths to give little children nightmares like I used to have. Antichrist? Asked Victor, still not understanding. Sorry, said Carla. He's a satanic figure in the Bible who's supposedly going to be worshipped as God and take over the world. You'll find it hard to believe, Victor, but in the West, this superstition is so strong that the number 666, which is supposedly the Antichrist number, really frightens people. Even major Hollywood films have exploited the fear it generates. She turned to Frank. I'm mystified as to why the Archons would want to identify their New World Order with a symbol that's certain to arouse paranoia and opposition. They didn't explain it, said Frank, looking a bit perplexed himself. I'm as curious as you are to know why they chose what most people consider to be a negative symbol. There's no need to explain something so obvious, broke in Del Sasso impatiently. It's a stroke of genius, and a bold one. The Antichrist myth has obsessed Westerners for centuries. Even people who don't go to church will pay to watch a movie that depicts that nonsense. And instead of looking at it like any other horror film, they sit there transfixed with the fear that it really could happen. That's exactly what I was saying, interjected Frank. Using 666 can hardly arouse much goodwill and support. And you're a psychologist, Frank? Returned Del Sasso. Shame on you for not recognizing what the Archons are doing. They're incredible psychologists. They're going to force the world to face the obsessive fear of the Antichrist head-on and get rid of it once and for all. But think of the outcry from Christians everywhere, protested Carla. Use 666 and they'll point to the Bible prophecies and call this the fulfillment. They'll be able to say, aha, we told you so. It's an Antichrist plot. Let them say it. That's precisely the strategy. It's ingenious. Del Sasso leaned back and went into paroxysms of laughter. It's brilliant, he added, wiping the tears from his eyes when he had recovered. If the fundamentalist watchdogs were able to sniff around and come up with suspicions of some Antichrist connection, well, that might catch on. But to call government leaders to a 666 summit makes it so upfront that no one can make charges about a hidden agenda. Don't you see? Frank and Morris were nodding their agreement. It's brilliant, said Kay. I'm sure it goes beyond what any of us understands at this point, added Del Sasso. But there's something deeper and of greater importance involved that's rather obvious. Can you see what it is? It's got to be more than just a clever means of disarming the opposition, suggested Carla. I think it's also a declaration, almost a state of faith they're requiring from world leaders, and eventually from Earth's entire population. Is that what you mean? Voila! Del Sasso reached over and gave Carla a playful pat on the cheek. You're really getting tuned in. The Archons who are watching you closely, day and night, must be very pleased. You've lost me, said Victor. It's actually rather simple, said Del Sasso. And as you know, simplicity is one of the marks of genius. By identifying themselves with the forbidden number 666, world leaders, who are obviously not followers of some mythical Antichrist, will destroy this superstition in one stroke. Talk about pulling the rug out, said Leighton, becoming more enthusiastic with every new insight. Anyone who accuses this New World Order of being a front for the Antichrist will be laughed out of court. Exactly. It's like the chief in a primitive tribe violating a taboo, went on Del Sasso. He either gets killed or he puts an end to the prohibition and thereby liberates his followers. By identifying themselves with 666, participants in the Congress will liberate the world from a superstitious fear that has inhibited real progress for centuries. That will be the end of the Antichrist myth forever. Pardon me, Antonio, added Carla with excitement mounting in her voice, but there's an even greater genius behind this bold move. She turned to Victor. You're having difficulty understanding this because you were raised in an atheistic environment, free from the harmful effects of Christian superstitions. If you knew what a strong grip the idea of an Antichrist has in the West, you'd realize that in order to usher in their new order, the archons have to destroy this idea. The Bible says that 666 represents a man who will establish a new world order in rebellion against the supreme being. Shame, shame, the Christians will cry against those who take that number. But bravo, say I. It's a rebellion that has to happen, and whose time has come. It will liberate the world forever from the demeaning lie that mankind can't make it on its own and has to grovel in confession of its sin and inadequacy and live off the crumbs of grace that Christ drops now and then from his sumptuous table. So it is an Antichrist rebellion after all, said Victor, beginning to understand at last. Of course it is. Del Sasso's jaw was set and his eyes were flashing with the fire of independence. We will indeed establish what the Bible has called the rule of Antichrist. It won't be evil, however, like the Bible warns, but a monument to the innate goodness and deity of man. And it will be led by a man who embodies this deity in its grandeur and fullness.